ask you guys, what do we know about Node so far? Don't Google anything yet. Maybe we will Google stuff in a bit, but what do we know about Node already?
We can kind of use it like an IDE, right?
What?
Can we kind of use it like an IDE?
Ooh, I would say that sounds like a bad direction as far as understanding what Node is. You can use, there are IDE features that run off of Node, I would say, but I would not say you can use Node like an IDE.
It lets you use JavaScript outside a web browser.
Oh, so fucking good of an answer. Cool. Awesome. What else we got? Have we used Node already?
Little bit.
When?
This morning.
Doing what? Oh, actually, I mean, has everybody in the program used Node a little bit already? Start with that.
For React, we use it, right?
Yeah, React is a Node package. So that's a good start. Cool. What do all Node packages have? What do all Node, if you're making a project in Node, what are some things you have access to in your project that makes it kind of like a Node project? I bet you know more than you think.
The Node modules.
Node modules. Cool. What command do you run to get those Node modules to show up? What's like your equivalent of bundle install in Node? Do you remember? What do you run whenever you download someone else's React project?
Npm install.
Npm. That was what I was looking for. Npm is Node Package Manager. Cool. We'll start tying this stuff together in a bit. Anything else that we might have in Node that you can think of? If not, that's okay. If you can't think of anything, that's totally fine.
It's got the package.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Beautiful. Anything else?
And the package lock, right?
Yep. Cool. Alrighty, now I'm going to do some teaching here. So first of all, let's define what is Node. Whoops. So what is Node though? Okay, by definition, Node is a JavaScript runtime. I'm going to give y'all like a minute to Google what the fuck a runtime is. And by the way, I don't know the exact definition, so I'm going to Google it too. But I know how it's used. So doodle-doo. All right, who wants to try and answer what is a runtime?
It's
It's like code that executes while a program is running.
Sure, yeah. It's like your code executing. That's exactly all I think of whatever runtime is. So for example, let's say I ran code in Ruby. I write Ruby, and then I run that file. Ruby is a language, but in this case, Ruby is also a runtime because I'm executing this code using some software that runs that code. So in a way, Ruby is your runtime and it's your language as well. Node is a JavaScript runtime. So now we're going to take those two concepts, we're going to split them apart. JavaScript is just the language that you're programming in. Runtime is like, sort of like that code as it exists in a moment of time running through your computer. Does that make sense? A runtime represents that code running through your computer. So Node is a runtime for JavaScript. Can anyone think of another runtime for JavaScript?
The browser?
The browser, exactly. So Node is a runtime that runs on our computer, and it runs JavaScript. There's one other big runtime for JavaScript, and it's fairly new that I could think of. Anybody have an idea what that is? Dino. That's a new technology. Don't worry about it for now. I've never programmed anything using Dino, but it's like the guy who invented Node wrote Dino to replace Node, but it hasn't gotten popular yet. Node's the popular one. Cool. Now let's just start comparing Node shit to shit that we already know in Ruby. What is Node's package manager versus Ruby's? What is Ruby's package manager? Bundler, exactly. So we'll do shit like bundle install, bundle add, and we do that, and this allows us to add other people's code to our project and shit like that. But in Node, we have NPM, or very explicitly, Node package manager. Cool. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So these two things basically wind up doing the same thing, just in different languages. And they do it a different way, but they have the same purpose. There's also another thing called NVM. Does anybody know what that stands for?
It's like version.
Yeah, Node version manager. So this would be like, let's say I'm just going to open up a terminal. If I just type in like, I think I could do node -- version. It's like a very specific version of Node that came out. And you can get different versions. So I could do like NVM use 14.13.0. And now on my computer, I haven't installed it. But the point is now I can switch the versions of Node that I'm using. So that way if I'm working in different projects, I could switch that around. Cool. You might not have to do that very often right now. So be it. All right. But let's be real here. Y'all didn't come here to learn about Node, I'm guessing. I'm guessing a lot of y'all came here to learn about Express. We're going to do a little bit more Node stuff because we just want to compare like what's going on in the browser versus what's going on into the runtime. So first, let's talk about that, and then we'll kind of dive into some Express stuff. And I'm going to even one-up you and ask some questions for you that I don't think you know how to ask yet, if that's okay with y'all. Sweet. So first, let's talk about like Node and browser.js. So you know how when I'm doing JavaScript for like a website, I could type in document.query selector. Cool. Do something in here, you know, or let's be more accurate here, right? What object does this line of code depend on? What is the object in this line of code?
Hummus.
Document.
Document. right? So this whole line of code depends on the document. Where does the document come from?
Hummus.
The DOM.
It comes from the DOM. So since you don't have access to the DOM, there's a whole bunch of stuff in regular Node that you don't have access to because it's not in the browser. That being said, you also do have access to something that you don't have access to in the browser. And what that would be is your file system. So while you have access to the DOM in the browser, in Node, you have access to your whole file system on your computer, which is actually a little bit more flexible in what you can do. Cool. We're not going to go too deep into like these differences because in all reality, you're probably going to learn them and forget them until you actually have to use them. So for now, I'm just going to leave it at that. All right, time for some checks for understanding. Kevin, what is Node?
Node lets you use JavaScript outside of your browser.
Bing. Cool. All right.
Hummus.
Oh, there's one other thing I forgot to show about Node. Because it's a runtime, you can kind of treat it like, do you remember how in Ruby you have IRB and you could start just
Hummus.
playing around with code?
Hummus.
Well, you can do a similar thing in Node. So if I ever want to just test out some JavaScript, I can go ahead and type in Node and I could be like, we'll let A equals 5. Oh, A minus 5, whoops. A equals 5. I could do A plus 8. JSON.stringify. A plus 8. And then it's just going to turn into a string. Whatever. Cool. You get the idea though, right? Like I can do JavaScript and test it out using a Node runtime. I do that all the time in code challenges just to make sure like a very classic use case for me would be like, let's say I forgot how slice works, right? So maybe what I'll do is I'll hop into Node and I'll do like 1, 2, 3 dot slice, and then I just want to slice it. Let's say I want to slice just out 2. I want to make sure I could do that right. I think I would do a 1 and then a 3 here. Nope, a 1 and a 2. So now that means that I have a better idea of how this slice function is working, just because I might have forgotten like how it uses those indexes. Maybe it's off by 1, something like that. It's always good to check in something like this where it's like, oh, okay, that took me what, a fucking 20 seconds to figure out how slice works. And now I don't actually have to remember how slice works. I can just go check it in a Node runtime. So that's something that's super useful to me. If you don't ever use that kind of stuff in JavaScript, maybe you should, just to try and push yourself into like learning how to learn different ways. I'll test it out with filters, reduces, anything complex. I'll test it out in Node runtimes all the time. Cool. But let's talk about the library that you probably came here for. Not Rails. Woo, that was silly. Okay. The library that you probably came here for is Express. So first we're going to talk a little bit about Express. And the reason why we're going to talk about Express before we actually get into Express is because y'all are like, there's a good bit of mod 5ers in here. And I want y'all to have an idea of like the technology, the kind of like maybe the, I would say the ecosystem of Express and Node and all that stuff. So you can kind of have a feel of like, what's the layout of this place that I'm walking into? That's kind of something that I thought was the hardest part about learning about Node and all that stuff. For example, I use Node all the fucking time and I almost never use Express directly, personally. Cool. So Express is a backend framework. What does it allow us to do? It allows us to do the part of Rails that is like, let me send a request in and get some information out. So basically, it's your controller in Rails. That's all that it does. It's not necessarily like, what it doesn't do is have built-in models that interact with a database. That's all stuff that you have to configure yourself. So if Rails is a model view controller architecture, Express is the controller in that piece of the puzzle. If you want to have models that you import into Express, well, now you have to actually configure that yourself by like installing node packages and putting those Lego pieces together yourself. Does that make sense? Cool. So that's like, I think one of the biggest takeaways about like what your experience might be like learning Express. Because if you want to learn Express, you should know that you're configuring those Lego pieces if you learn a library like Express. But here's the thing, since Express is like, basically from what I could tell, and I'm not like Kyle when it comes to knowledge on JavaScript, as far as like historical knowledge of JavaScript, as far as I can tell, Express basically won as far as being the fucking library for this purpose. There are other libraries that exist that do similar things. There's one that was invented, I think, by the same team called Koa. There's other libraries that do similar things, but for the most part, a lot of libraries use Express. That being said, there are libraries that are built on top of Express. So let's say you want to learn a JavaScript framework, but maybe you're like, I don't want to put all those puzzle pieces together. There are options for you. There's different frameworks built on top of Express. One of the ones that I've heard about that's super popular that I think maybe even Kyle said he heard about, but it was like Feather.js. I have to work with one now called Nest.js, which uses TypeScript. Whoops. And there's a bunch of other, but there's a whole bunch of libraries that are frameworks that use Express, but then maybe have some added functionality. Like maybe you can generate a controller. They have the built-in model features and shit like that, if that makes sense. Does that kind of make sense how that kind of ecosystem works there? Cool. And also, just to clarify, one of the things that's super nice about Express is like, there are so many fucking JavaScript packages. The community is huge. That means that if you have a very specific thing that you want to do and there's only one package for it and it's in JavaScript, a lot of times you'll be in a good position because you don't have to think of some weird screwy way of getting it done. You can just go ahead, install the npm package to your project and get it done. So like, for example, a use case where I learned Express and had to do Express was I wanted to work with sockets. Don't worry about what those are, but it turns out one of the easiest libraries to get into sockets is called sockets.io. And sockets.io happens to be a NPM module. So because of that, it's very easy to incorporate into an Express project. And there winds up being a lot of stuff like this on why Node is maybe a good ecosystem to like kind of get into, because there's just a lot of different technologies available for Node that you could very easily incorporate into your project if you're using a Node library. But if you're not using a Node library, you might run into some difficulties. A Node API or whatever, Node server. Cool. All right, let's build some Express apps. What do you think? Let's build a simple Express app, and we could talk about some other shit after. Now, again, because I never build Express apps, we're just going to go to Express. Yeah, Express.js. And we're going to do the basics. Cool. Before we even deal with Express, though, let's create a project. Do I have any code open? No, we're good. So I'm going to CD into throwaway. Oops. Jeez, Louise. There it goes. Cool. CD and throwaway. And now I'm going to make a directory, and we're just going to call it my first Node project. Bam. I'm going to open that up in code because against Kyle's wishes, I have bailed on Vim. I haven't completely bailed on Vim. I still use it. I was just using it to write notes, but still. All right. So we're going to do some terminal stuff now. Now that I'm CD'd into this project, the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Npm Init. And if you've watched any of Kyle's videos on this stuff, he does a -y. I just want to show you what happens if you don't use a -y. So we're just going to type in npm init, and it's going to ask me what's my project name, and it defaults to my first node project. That's cool with me. Awesome. My version 1.00. Yeah, this is my first version of the app. Cool. Awesome. Description. This is not actually my first node project, but it is possibly some of my students' first node project. Cool. Entry point, index.js sounds good to me. We'll talk about what that entry point means in a second. Test command, we're just going to press enter because we're not using a test command. Git repository, we don't have a Git repository, so we're just going to press enter. Keywords, I'm just going to type fuck in there for no good reason. Author is going to be John Higger, cool. And the license, I don't actually know how to use licenses because, you know, I haven't worked in that field too often. So I'm just going to go ahead and say this is okay. And if we look at this, this looks like what kind of file right now? What kind of file does that look like?
JSON?
Yeah, it looks just like a JSON file, and that's because it is. What we just did was we created a package.json, right? So when we created this package.json, this package.json is kind of similar to your gem file in Ruby. It contains, but it's a little bit more than just that. So it does contain like the packages that are required for your project. But on top of that, it also contains different scripts that you run, maybe to like start your app, different things. So for example, I could do, I could write a script that says, let's say, whoops, say hi. And then here, whatever I write in here is going to be this is going to be a terminal command. So in a terminal, you could type echo, and then I'm just going to say, sup, motherfucker. And now if I type in npm run, say hi, sup, motherfucker, it just outputs that. That's all that it does. Nothing super fancy. Cool. So every time you're in React and you do npm start, there's some script that codes for that, and it's like, it does something like React server start or something like that. But you're actually running a command when you do that, if that makes sense. Sweet. All right, so we've created this package.lock.json or package.json. Now I want to install some shit. Okay, so let's look at like what we need to get an Express app going. Cool. And we're just going to look at like the most basic documentation. Npm Install Express. That sure looks like a good starting point. So I'm going to type in npm install, or I could actually shorten that to just I. It knows that I is install. And I'm going to type in Express. Now let's look at what this did to our package.json. Basically, we said, okay, cool. Now we've installed this dependency on this package called Express. Then on top of that, this package.lock.json it basically locked down all of the dependencies that Express depends on. So now if I open up this node modules folder, we actually just installed all of these node packages because Express depends on all of these node packages. Now, this is something that's different about like in Ruby versus JavaScript, is that in JavaScript, right, we get this folder of all the things that we installed. So in in Node in general, this is how they handle like, oh, you installed this stuff, install all of this code, copy it all over into this new folder. In Ruby, it actually stores it into some global file on your computer. So that means that if I have two different projects, it's actually using the same folder in Ruby, but in in Node, if I have two different projects, it's using totally different copies of all those dependencies. Does that make sense? Kind of trippy, kind of weird. If that doesn't make sense, that's totally okay. We're just going to make some Express app pretty soon. But I actually think this stuff is in some ways more important than learning Express because you're going to be working in Node at some point. I'm sure you'll be working in Express at some point, possibly, I don't know, maybe not. But Node is like kind of cool to see how that stuff works. Sweet, so we've installed Express. One thing that you don't want to do ever is push up these Node modules to your GitHub. So let's say this was a GitHub file, which let's just do that just for good practice, because I guarantee you, if I don't do this, one of y'all will hit this problem and be like, oh, well, fuck, this is annoying to fix. So what you can do is you can create a git ignore. And in that git ignore, you literally just write node modules. And let's see what this does in VS Code. Maybe I have to reload my editor. Let's see if that works. Let's try this out. Oh, it didn't work. Usually this thing blacks out, but it could be this like plugin I have installed on why it didn't. Let's try reloading it. No, let me see if there's a GitHub Git extension.
John, can you put files as well as directories in your git ignore file?
Yes. Now there's a weird syntax to it. You will pretty much always see node modules in that git ignore though. Oh, is it just because I haven't saved this? Because that would be ridiculous. Whatever. Sometimes this thing blacks out. I don't know why it's not doing it right now. It's probably because I have a shit ton of shit on here. Cool. Well, whatever. I guess it didn't work. I mean, it still probably is working. The git ignore, I'm assuming, is working. Oh, I know exactly why it's not working. I'm dumb as hell. It's because I haven't done a git init. When I do a git init, now watch. Okay, cool. See how this shows up as a different color? That just tells me that Git is not tracking it. That's all. And that's nice because it lets me know, okay, when I push up to GitHub, this doesn't go up there. Let's just test that real quick since it doesn't take very long. We're going to go to now in Rails, this wasn't a problem. Why? Because the reason why is because, again, in Ruby, your packages do not live on your project. They live on your computer. But here, the packages live on your project. Now, you can recreate these packages with the package.json and the package.lock.json. Cool. So now I'm just going to go ahead and copy these commands. Bam. Oh, I probably should add commit first. This is just git add all and then git commit. That's all that does. That's a custom command I made. If y'all want to learn how to make custom commands, it's a different class. Just kidding. Sweet. Give this a refresh. Bada boom, bada bing. What don't we see on here?
Node modules.
Node modules. Great. Awesome. Sweet. So the next thing that we're going to do is let's get started on a basic ass Express app so we get a feel for its purpose. Now I could copy all this, but I'm not going to. I am going to try and do it off memory and fail miserably. So first of all, do you remember how we said the entry point was index.js? that means that whatever we call this next file probably should call index.js, because that's the first thing that gets run in our project. I think. We'll figure it out. Cool. All right, so the first thing that we have to do is import Express. So one thing that you'll find in most documentation, if you come from the React world, this is basically doing the same thing as import Express from Express. That is almost the same thing. It's just a little bit different of a syntax. This is newer than this is. So as a result, most stuff that you'll see in Express uses require and not import. Cool. Now in Node, whenever you type in require and don't put like a ./ or anything there, it requires from Node modules. So if I do require and then, whoops, daisies.
Hummus.
So if I do require Express, then that requires the Node module called Express. Makes sense? Awesome. Then this basically is something, this returns an object to me, and that object has methods. So now I can say, off of that Express object, I can invoke Express, and it returns now like a more workable thing. It's kind of, I wish I could give you a more technical definition, but like this Express is a package of different things, and if you invoke it with no arguments, it just gives you like the base form of the app. I think you can invoke it with options too. Now, one of the methods that this thing has is it's called .get. Does anyone have an idea of what this get might stand for?
Get request.
A get request. So this is like saying if you send a get request to the main folder, then run this function. Now, for some of you, you just learned about callback functions today. Guess what this is right here? It's a callback function. Why is it a callback function? What?
Is it a callback function?
It's a. How'd you know?
I called my mom.
Oh, Kat, can you explain to me why this is a callback function?
Because you're calling a function inside of another function.
Because you're calling the function inside of another, because you're calling it inside of another function, but because you're calling it as a blank to another function.
As an argument.
Beautiful. So because this is an argument to another function, it's a callback function. Unlike the callback function for an event, though, the callback function for an event passes what in?
The event.
The event. What does it look like this thing passes in? Any guesses?
The request and the response.
Oh, beautiful. It's a request object and a response object. Sweet. Then you can do stuff with those. All right. So let's give this a shot. We're going to say const app equals express, and then we are going to say app.get because it's a get request. And we want the file path to be just the root for now. And you know what? They did their callback function like this, but nobody really does that anymore. So we're going to do ours like this. Request, response, and we are going to pop a fat arrow in there, open that up, and we are going to delete that. And now what we're going to say is response.send And we are just going to send, what's up? That's all that we're going to say. Awesome. And now we have to call another method on this, which is where do I listen from? And it's going to be app.listen. And then now we provide a port number. So let's listen on port 9000. And I forget how to run this.
Node index.js.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, that's right. You could just. Yeah. That's exactly right. You just run it in Node. So I could just type in Node, and then index.js. Bam! See how it froze? That's what Express does if you don't do anything fancy to it. So let's go to localhost 9000. What's up? We made our first Express app. Woo! I'm excited. Cool. Nice. Let's make a fake backend. Let's make a backend that's like not real. Okay. So we're just gonna make a fake backend out of using JSON. So I'm going to add a JSON file. We'll just call it like data.json. No, we're gonna call it like characters.json. Right? We're going to go here. This is going to look like, actually, you know what? It's going to be an array of objects. Cool. Name. We'll start with Coulter.
You got this, John.
What is it? Fuck. It's Denny's. There we go. How's that? Does that fit?
Yes.
Good. Cool. And then who else gets to be a character? Let's go with Cat and William. Cat Williams. That wasn't even funny. Let's see. Williams is going to be. William, what's your slogan? I can't think of one.
Hakuna Matata.
Oh, I'm definitely going to misspell that, but I love it.
What a wonderful phrase.
What does that mean?
It means no worries for the rest of your days.
That could not have gone any better.
I thought it meant hummus.
All right. So now what I can do, let's say I want to get a different URL. Maybe I can do app.get, and we'll say, let's get the characters endpoint, right? And now, instead of just sending some response all willy-nilly, first we have to get that JSON file. Fun fact, you can fetch JSON straight up. So that's just, if you didn't know that, you can. So we're going to fetch /characters.json, and then just like always, we're going to take that response. Oh, I don't want to use the word. Yeah, I'll use the word response. Goes to response. I think it's fine because if you're inside of a function and you call an argument that thing, JavaScript will default to this taking priority over the other thing. And then what do we want to do? Maybe when we get these back, we're going to take our characters And we are just going to say, then we're going to say, here we're going to say response.send characters. And let's see if it worked. Fuck. Oh, you have to restart your server every time. Unless you get another plugin. Fetch is not defined. Oh, you have to import. Right. I'm really glad that we ran into that. You need to import fetch. Fetch is not fetch is not default. Fetch is one of those things that actually I think comes from HTML. It's not a Node thing. So I'm actually really glad we ran into that error. Let's look up fetch in Node and just see what the record Node fetch. Oh, okay, cool. This looks really hard to install. Ready? Now y'all get to see the beauty of Node. Npm install Node fetch. Cool. And I probably have to const fetch equals require node fetch. And now let's see if this breaks again. Hey, that wasn't so bad, was it? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I don't think we fixed it. Oh, I think we're running into some errors here. Only absolute URLs are supported. That looks like it doesn't like this, but I think I can just do that. We'll find out. As y'all can tell, I don't do this very often. Oh, is it saying the same thing? I think maybe we need this. We'll find out. Uh-oh. Serves me right for trying to delve into uncharted territory.
So you can fetch locally like that?
I think you might have to do something like this. You might have to get the, so it says absolute URLs. So like, I might actually need to grab the current directory, which you actually can grab like this. __ dir name. We'll see if that works. Give this a save. I give this a 25% chance of working. 75% chance of instant KO. Ooh, what does this one say? But yes, you can fetch that. It says only absolute URLs are supported. Fetch JSON, local JSON. Node fetch. I've done this before in browser.js. Okay, so they recommend that you should use file system instead, is basically what it is. But fortunately, this is maybe a good, I mean, are y'all down to go down this rabbit hole? Because I don't really have much else to teach on this. Like, what I can tell you is that this thought process, though, will kind of maybe expose you to like what Node is. You're programming all this stuff yourself. Yeah, no, this wouldn't be a fetch. This would be something else. This would be a different kind of statement that connects to maybe like a database. So instead of doing a fetch right here, what you would do is some other thing that probably returns a promise, then doing whatever with that, and then sending it out. But the point is that you're manually configuring all of these yourself. Because unlike Rails, which has convention over configuration, Node is really a lot more configuration over convention. You could do whatever the fuck you want in Node. if that makes sense. Okay, let's go ahead and try to like, I mean, do y'all down to go down this rabbit hole real quick? I think it's not that hard. I think you just use FS. So I think, because I actually did one of these the other day. I did a, let's see, I think I did a FS. Equals require FS. FS you don't have to npm install because it comes default with Node. So I think you could do that. And then if I look up the FS library, FS promises. There should be just like a read file. We'll just try it out. I think you do this. FS. Oh, wait, no. FS handler dot read file. And then now I think I have to pass in. I'll talk about what this dir name thing is in a second. You probably don't need to know it right now, but it can't hurt to know. And then we'll do. And then I think I do need to do a dot then here. Let's just go ahead and do a console.log and see what happens. Cool. Bam, bam. Oh, didn't like that. Oh, I think it might be this. Cool. Logos 9,000 / characters. And we're not going to get anything because it was just a console log. Oh, it broke. / characters. Oh, this is supposed to be a plus. And then this encoding. Right, that's what it was. Encoding equals, I think this is just supposed to say encoding. I'm going to try getting rid of the encoding and see if it still works. Let's find out. Got to restart the server. So this is a little bit annoying of a testing process. This might be something that you can still learn, even though I clearly don't know what I'm doing with this. But you can type in npm install. NoDaemon is a node package that like updates as you save. So let's look up the documentation on that. That's super easy to use.
Wait, so it's not NodeMon?
Man, NodeMon.
Both cool.
Nodman.
I mean, this kind of indicates to me that it's NoDaemon.
Okay, bet you're right. I'm on John's side now.
Nodman.
I'm sorry, you know, like that's just what the icon tells me. So this is kind of cool. Let's do this one. Only so that way y'all can see what npm --save dev does. This is kind of cool. I'm just going to copy that. npm installs --save dev. I want everyone to Google what that does before we look at what it does. It should be like a 20-second Google. All right, someone blurt it out as soon as you find it.
It only works in development, right?
Yep,
Like-
it saves it into your dev dependencies. So let's look at our package.json. And now, if we look at our dependencies, we have Express and Node Fetch, but our dev dependencies is NoDaemon. So what does that mean? That means when we deploy this thing, we don't have to send this code up because it's not necessary for our code to actually run. It's necessary while we're working on it. So then let's see how you run it.
Hummus.
Do you think it would hurt, John, to just install it straight up? Like, would it hurt to have it?
No. So NPX, actually, that brings up a good point, which is like, what's the difference between, you know, when I run like Light Server, for example. By the way, Light Server is a node package. Fun fact. We installed Light Server globally, right? So what that means is that somewhere globally on your computer, Light Server, the code for Light Server exists. There's two ways you can kind of do that. You can either install it globally or you can install it on a project. If you install Light Server on a project, then you need to run npx Light Server. npx means go into the node modules of this project and run the code out of there instead of looking globally. Also, whenever you write a script in here, it defaults to having npx at the beginning of it, if that makes sense. So let's talk about what is the nodemon and then your node app, right? So I think that I want to create, first let's test it in our command line, but I'm pretty sure if I type in npx nodemon, nodemon, and then if my app lives on index.js, I think that does what I want, right? So now it's running index.js. Let's see if it's running, because if I hit, let's hit this endpoint, it works. And then if I hit this endpoint, it breaks. Unhandled promise rejection. And this looks a lot better too, right? So cool. Nodemon works. Now let's write a script for it. So I could make npm start, and then here I'll write the script that runs nodemon. So, whoops. Oh, Lord. So here I'm just going to type in nodemon index.js. And I don't need the npx here. In your browser, you would need that npx. We don't need it here. And then to run my code, I would type in npm run start. So I'm running the start script. Bam. This is the kind of shit that's really cool about Node that you can learn that has nothing to do with Express. This is all Node right here. This is not the Express ecosystem, Node. So now nodemon, it just checks for changes. So what that means is that it'll be a little more easily done for me to, fuck around with this. So it says unhandled promise rejection warning. It kind of seems like maybe I need another .then here. We'll find out. Goes to response.json. Y'all get to see me fuck up with promises. That's okay. This thing also, I think, needs an object with encoding in it. And I think the encoding, I'm going to call it UTF-8, but I don't know if that's right. I think it actually might just be like that. We'll find out. Let's give it a shot. Broke. Well, it doesn't like it. We could do a .catch. Error. And then we want to console.log error.message. Oh, whoops.
You do a .json after your character's path?
Oh. That's literally probably exactly what it is. Let's see what it says. Response.json is not a function. Oh, because this is not. Oh man, this was not smart. This is not a This is not fetch. .json is a specific method that comes from the fetch library. So I think I would have to do json.parse my response. Oh, whoops. I've never done this with like, I think that I need to restart this and hit that again. And if y'all like want to just fire off some questions instead of watching me fuck shit up, feel free. I could probably still answer some of your questions, even though I can't figure this problem out. Oh, I think it actually worked. I just didn't console log anything. Then with our characters, we want to response.send characters. If you can't tell, I'm kind of winging it. Hey, motherfucker! Cool, got it. Now, in reality, you probably wouldn't use like a file reading library here. Instead, what you would use is some kind of database library. So some kind of library that lets you interface with a database, pull the data out, and Express is really just the part that connects you to the user. You can go a lot deeper with Express as far as like the different endpoints you can have, how you structure things. There's a whole concept called middleware. We're not going to worry about that now, but it's really just, I would say above this, it's really just fancy stuff. For example, how do I have ID there? I think it's like that. So I think right now this will break. And then if I just put a random ID in there, it will work. Cool. So for example, if you wanted to make like a show endpoint, right? You basically could take this, copy it, and you know what? Let's edit this characters JSON to just add IDs. Let's just yank that. Whoops. Daisies. Cool. So then what I could do is if I wanted to make like a show endpoint, for example, I could do get characters and then /ID. And now what I do is instead of sending characters, I could send characters dot find, look through all the characters, and I want to find where character dot ID is equal to, I think it would probably be like request.id, but I'm not sure. That's literally a complete guess.
I think you want request.params.id.
Is that what it is?
I think so.
That sure looks familiar, doesn't it? That's working. One, maybe not. Let's see. Request parameters. Express. I wanted to cheat and use my grepper. Request.params.id. Sounded good to me. Oh, you know what? I think params would be if it was query params. No, it looks right. Who knows? It looks right based off of what you said that should work. But I mean, whatever. I guess if we wanted to follow the same convention, it would be character and then ID. And then here would be character dot ID equals rest dot params dot character ID. Yep. No idea if it'll work. Maybe try restarting the server. But anyways, I think y'all get the point of like what Express is. And I think you'll also get the point that I'm not a beast at Express. I mean, sorry, not Express, but Node in general. And you don't have to be a beast at Node. If you want to build a project in Node, you're definitely going to have to like be better than I am. But you'll be able to do it, especially if you're like mod 5 and you have that time to spend on it. Just know that you're going to be spending time like configuring stuff like, oh, and this is what's kind of cool about it. Maybe not the most efficient for creating apps quickly, but like, for example, Rails comes with active record. Express does not come with an equivalent of active record. If you want something like active record, you need to find a package that does that and configure Express to work with that package. Does that make sense?
Is connects similar to active record?
I think connects is I want to say connects is part of active record. I think connects gets your like database queries, and then active record does database queries, but it also does object relational methods. I'm not sure if you get those. I'm not sure if you get those relationships in connects. You might need something else for that. I've never used connect. I've never built a full Node Express app. I've used Express apps to like connect to S3 buckets. But like here, let's look up connects. If connects is an ORM,
It's not quite. It's just a query constructor, I think.
So let's look up ORMs for JavaScript. Oh, something else I wanted to mention before we go too deep down that rabbit hole. One of the things that I prepared are some other questions that you just might have questions about, which we kind of already answered that one. But I thought y'all might have questions. I know a bunch of people were thinking about doing the MERN stack. Does anybody know what like the M in the MERN stack is as far as like what's going on there?
It's MongoDB.
What is MongoDB?
MongoDB is a non-relational database.
What is a non-relational database?
It kind of looks like JSON instead of like tables.
Yep.
About what I know.
Yeah, that's about all you need to know before actually trying it out. It's that non-relational database. It's obviously not good at what?
Relationships.
Creating relationships. So the truth is that if you want to create your app in a way that has different relationships going on, MongoDB might not be the best idea. That being said, you can fake relationships in MongoDB. How? Don't worry about it for now. But there's basically, well, I'll tell you how. There's like another software package that you use on the front end, which basically says, okay, fake these relationships. I believe it's called Mongoose for MongoDB. And you can create those relationships without them really being there. But like, let's think of something that would be nice for something like MongoDB. Let's say you just want to store some messages for a chat app, right? You don't really need relationships there. You just maybe need a user ID on that chat or all the user IDs involved or whatever. And there doesn't need to be a relationship. So to simplify it, you just store it as a big JSON object, each instance of a message. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? Because I'm out of things to say. I'm out.
Can we go back to that search looking for ORM?
Yep.
Express?
ORMs for JavaScript. The one that I used on a project that I made was called Sequelize. And let's see what we have. Oh, this one says ORMs in Node and why you shouldn't use them. What is their argument? Layers of abstraction. I don't know that I could find any high level. I've never heard anybody say that you shouldn't use ORMs. I don't think I've ever heard that argument made before. Layers of abstraction, but okay, this one uses connects there. It makes sense that an ORM can't do everything because it's obviously a piece of software that does something very specific for you. Let's look at this one. I think connects is a big one. Sequelize is another one. And then another option is using like a framework on top of Express. So for example, like that's what Feather.js is, I think. Like in Feather.js, you're like, it's almost like more of like a Rails type framework. See, Mongoose is one of these, but I don't think it's technically called an ORM. I think it's called an OR something else, just because it's not a relational database. So looks like both Bookshelf is one. And you see how Bookshelf is an ORM that's built on the Connects SQL library. That's kind of cool. Objection. I think this is what Kyle uses. I think Kyle uses like connects and objection. I think he combines those two, but I could be wrong. Again, I was never like a Node person as a student, so I never really built a project using Node too deeply. I was a Vue fanboy. I used Sequelize and hated it. I didn't like it, but it is like the most popular one, I think. I did not like it. That's just my personal experience. Any other questions?
Could I shoot a kind of off-topic question if no one else has any on-topic questions?
Sure.
Is everybody chilling?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, bet. Is it so like if I would want to store data on like an external cloud storage, like S3 or something, how would you send like a post request there?
So that's a great question. So like this is one thing that like Node is great for. It's great for setting up like quick servers that only do one small thing. So for example, using an S3 bucket the way Kyle teaches it, which is awesome, is let's say I have my app. Ooh. In this app, a user should be able to upload a picture, right? So you would think, okay, straight from this front end, I just send a request to something called an S3 bucket, which is basically just like storage for different file types, more like pictures and videos and stuff like that is what you'd use S3 for. So let's say I have my S3 here. Bam. The problem is, in order to store on this S3, you need to send over stuff like tokens. So something that like stores valuable information that says how can this person access this, right? So that means that if you need to store a token, that means that anything that's on the actual app itself, though, the user has access to. A user has access to anything, any code that you send out client side. That means that if someone who knows what they're doing goes into the app, they could probably find that token to get into your S3 bucket, and then they can just use that as if they're like an authenticated user. You don't really want that, right?
Right.
So what you can do instead is create a layer of abstraction there. So instead of having your token go straight into the S3 bucket, you have your token go into boop, 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 boop. A shitty little Node app. And all this Node app does is it gets the request from the user and forwards that request to the S3 bucket.
So it doesn't go through your database. Or
Right,
mine.
so you're not storing anything on here, right? You're storing nothing on there. All that you're doing is temporarily taking that stream of data and forwarding it along to this S3. But what lives on here would be like your S3 login credentials. And that's it. That's the whole purpose of that little Express app right there. Does that make sense? Now, if your app is built in Express, you can just make an endpoint for this and make that live on your like main backend. That's easy, right? If your app does not have like an Express backend, and also like in here, something I should clarify is that in here, there's tools that Amazon gives you that works with Node specifically that makes it a little easier to set up in Node than maybe something like Rails. And that's kind of like what I've heard about. Part of the advantage to Node is that there's just tooling that's available for Node that's kind of like user-friendly kind of thing. So you put together like a quick little shitty Node app that just takes in this request from the app, sends it to the S3. You do a similar thing with like WebSockets, but like in general, you can take these Node apps and do like, this is why you would want to learn Express outside of, even if you were to use something like Feather.js on a project that configures Express for you, you kind of want to learn some Express stuff anyways, because doing stuff like this is useful. Does that make sense? Creating a little piece of software that does one simple thing, even if it's not like a RESTful API. Like this is not a RESTful API here. Cool.
So I guess it like vaguely makes sense. So you would like my main app, like the big app down there,
Mm-hmm.
you could have, I guess it wouldn't be there. So like on the front end, if you had like a input type file and you allow a user to like upload a file, how do you get that to S3? With your shitty little app,
there's ways to send like a fetch, like just with fetch, there's a way to do a fetch that specializes at sending like, I don't remember the data type, but you can send like a stream of more complex data. Like it might be a blob or something like that. I don't know. I don't have like the right answer for you. I know that Kyle has a tutorial on it that took me a good 4 hours to run through. And that's after graduating the program. But I also know that if you ask for help, people will help you. But since I'm a prideful piece of shit, I had to kind of do it myself. And it took me a while of figuring some stuff out. Navigating like Amazon can kind of suck. But here, I will put this in the Slack if you're curious. I'll put it under a link to this.
Thanks.
Bam. So that was a pretty useful video. And it just talks about like basically that setup there and why it's there. Oh yeah, Molter is the thing that does it. It handles multi-part form data. So I guess there's some weird, beyond my scope of understanding, but you can make a multi-part form that sends special type of data over the internet, and then you have to have special libraries to parse it out. And that's why they use this NPM package called a Molter. And they use a form where the encoding type is multi-part form data. Did that answer your question?
Vaguely. It gives me a good starting point. Like I obviously don't know 100% how I do it, but it makes it more clearer. Yes. So thanks.
Sweet. Cool. Any other questions?
Thanks, John.
No problemo. Y'all have a chill afternoon. Let me read some of these messages out loud. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. All that warms the cockles of me heart. Ahmed, who's kind of like a Jamaican was saying it. Hakuna Matata, pimp down, pimp in distress. What's up? This is interesting. Hummus, roasted garlic. These are great messages. Sorry, I was just reading through them. Someone was working out to physical. Glad to hear that that song was motivating. All right, y'all have a great afternoon. Cheers. Peace. May the force be with you. Great
Let's
hats.
blast
Great
off.
hats. Peace.
Jeez.
Go fucking